And we've decided that by using the title Economy, Markets, and Fiscal Policy, we've left sufficient room for any orators and deep thinkers to proceed with glee. We'd like to start this afternoon's program with commentary from two people, and those, oh, I'm sorry, yes. We should have sort of an automatic roll call. Charles, will you start?
been the leaders in the budget community, running the Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Management and Budget from Capitol Hill. And it's a group that spends most of our energy working with members on the Hill to try to find ways to improve responsible budgeting. I think the topic, I actually think whatever topic we had chosen for discussion today, we would have ended up talking about the topic that we're going to. What's going on in the economy, what's going on with financial markets, whether and if fiscal policy had any contribution to what's going on, and how it will affect fiscal policy going forward. So we do these discussions annually. We have no sort of necessary direction in which we want to go. What we just like to do is spend our time bringing together some of the most thoughtful people on a variety of topics and hope that the discussions that we have can inform both policy making and thinking in New York. One of the things that we were just discussing in our board meeting that we just had before this is how there still isn't nearly enough communication between what's going on in financial markets, the business community, and policymakers here in Washington, D.C. So we hope that by bringing this great, diverse group of people together for discussion today and further discussion this evening at dinner on what's going on in campaigns, we'll start building some bridges with our group, certainly, and different folks from the budget world and from the financial world. So I think our fearless co-chairs, Leon Panetta and Bill Frenzler, are going to lead us in our discussion today.
Yeah, thank you, Maya, and thanks to each of you for your interest and your participation. The two designated leadoff batters are Richard Berner.
I'm sorry, but Peter Orzog already has a question.
Oh, Peter, okay.
Is this on the record? This is on the record. I assume you would all say the same thing. Does that
change your mind, Peter?
Please use your microphones.
The first commenter will be Richard Berner of Morgan Stanley, and he'll be shortly followed by David Walker. Richard?
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. I'm going to keep my comments really brief. I think there are a number of people around the table who probably share my views on what's going on in markets. I think we're in a very serious financial crisis, and it's a crisis that is global. The Federal Reserve has taken aggressive steps to provide market liquidity, and I think those steps are they're bearing fruit. But the nature of the crisis is that we've had an enormous amount of lending that is turning into loss. The scope of the losses is still something that we're all trying to grapple with. Yan and Ed probably put the estimates of total losses somewhere north of a trillion. We wouldn't be far off from that mark. And that's going to erode very significantly the capital base of America's financial institutions. And that capital base is going to have to be rebuilt. And that process is going to take time. The recognition of the losses is also going to proceed over time. And the consequences for the economy of those losses is obvious, I think, to most people. Both the price of credit has gone up and the availability of credit is being restricted as the deleveraging of the financial system takes place and continues to take place. So fiscal policy is clearly going to play a role to cushion the blow with the Economic Stimulus Act that was already passed, and I think more is probably coming. It's going to mean fairly sizable budget deficits, I think, in the near term on a cyclical basis. And obviously that comes at a time when we're a lot closer to all the problems that a lot of the people around this table have long identified as presenting daunting fiscal challenges for us and for our children and for our grandchildren. So that's maybe sort of the broad brush way of introducing, I think, some of the problems we face.
Thank you, Richard. David?
Well, one of the things that I've been concerned about for a while, and I know it's shared by a number of people here, is the fact that people tend to be focused on today, and that in order to get people to think about an issue that is not an immediate issue, you have to talk about something that is current and somehow try to translate it to something that they ought to be focusing more attention on and draw analogies. Well, I did that. I attempted to do that yesterday in an op-ed that was published on Politico.com to deal with our current concern with the mortgage challenge and also the fallout, including the impact on Bear Stearns. And let me tell you the four things that I talked about that I think are common with regard to what happened recently and the much bigger challenge we face fiscally. First, there's a disconnect between the people who are benefiting and the people who are bearing the risk. That was clearly the case in the mortgage transactions. The people that generated the fees were not the people who necessarily bore the risk. And you had the disintermediation, and clearly that's the case with regard to current fiscal policy. The current taxpayers are benefiting from low taxes and high spending, and future taxpayers will pay the bill with compound interest. Secondly, transparency. There was clearly a lack of adequate transparency with regard to especially a number of the specialized securitization arrangements. People didn't really know how much exposure they had. They didn't really know how much risk they have. We have similar challenges with regard to the federal government because we have a lot of off-balance sheet obligations that are frankly the real problem. The problem's not the balance sheet, not the $9 trillion in debt. The problem's the $44 trillion unfunded promises and other issues. Thirdly, cash flow. Bear Stearns found out the hard way. You can be worth whatever you want from the standpoint of market cap, from the standpoint of your balance sheet, but if you don't have adequate cash flow, you can go bankrupt and be forced into a very serious fire sale situation very quickly, an immediate crisis that spirals out of control, and where you lose control. And we've got some very similar situations with regard to the fact that we still think that things like trust funds mean something. The bonds in the trust funds do, but the trust funds mean nothing. They're trust the government funds. And we need to be focusing more on cash flow. And last but certainly not least, in the case of the current mortgage challenge and related implications, you know, people didn't have their eye on the ball. People in the government didn't have their eye on the ball. People in the private sector didn't have their eye on the ball, and we ended up having a lot of big surprises. Well, guess what? People don't have their eye on the ball with regard to the big federal fiscal challenge either.
Thank you, David. Leon.
If I could, following up on the comments on the present situation, I guess I'd be interested in how deep is the present crisis that we're in, because, I mean, we saw the market yesterday kind of, or at least the general editorial comment was that somehow we bottomed out and things are going in the other direction. Do you believe that's true? Or on the contrary, Bernanke was up there today, at least giving the impression that we may very well be in a recession, and it may be one that may stretch out for a period here. What's your sense about the depth of the crisis that we're in? And in conjunction with that, let me just ask the question, the obvious question. The Fed is obviously taking a very activist role in trying to deal with this present situation. And, which I guess one can argue one way or the other. It seems to me they're trying to do what they can to try to ensure that this crisis doesn't get any deeper. But is the price for that going to be greater regulation? And secondly, does it provide now a reason for the federal government to provide a similar bailout with regards to consumers that are affected by this crisis?
Richard, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure, I don't want to hog the microphone, but I think that, Leon, your last question is very germane. It's hard to help Wall Street, as they say, without helping Main Street, and I think that Bear Stearns was a game changer in that respect, and I think it certainly has galvanized, at least politically, people in the Congress and in the administration to change their views as to whether or not there should be or there will be assistance. It certainly, I think, from my standpoint, means that some form of assistance is likely, whether it goes all the way to some of the proposals that are floating on the Hill that could be very expensive, or whether it takes a much more limited form, very much remains to be seen over time. I think that's going to depend on how long the crisis lasts, how painful it is, and whether or not it's deep enough to provoke something that requires or elicits more draconian action. So I think that the answer to your other questions is absolutely. We're going to have a total reconsideration of financial services regulation underway right now. Again, that's not going to happen quickly. That's going to unfold over a period of time. But I think that these events have really changed perceptions about and brought to the fore how regulation has failed, how things have slipped through the cracks, and it will elicit a swing in the regulatory pendulum back in the direction that we've gone away from in the past 20 years. Some of that's good, and some of it may prove not to be so good. So, and in response to the first question, I think that courtesy of several factors, it may not prove to be a deep downturn like those we've had in the past, but my sense is that it's going to be several years before we work our way out of this situation. We're not going back to the aggressive lending practices that we've had that got us here, and that's a good thing. But curing the hangover is going to take some time, years rather than months.
Let me just add, maybe I agree with Dick on this, that it's a very, very fundamental change. It's a very serious deleveraging going on in the economy. I'd say in terms of financial market reactions, parts of the financial markets, at least parts of the fixed income markets, at least, have priced in, something that has gone well beyond just a sort of standard recession. So it can be entirely consistent to see, some improvement in some of the financial markets, and still in an economic environment that's, it's pretty dour and pretty difficult and recessionary. So I don't think there's really a contrast between what the chairman said today and yesterday's moves in the markets. I think what the Fed has done is they've extended the safety net on the liquidity side and have taken away probably some of the tail risk of sort of bank runs outside depository institutions. But I don't think that they've turned around the fundamental dynamic towards deleveraging and the recessionary economy that we're looking at the moment. I agree, it's probably not going to be a very deep recession, partly because there's stimulus coming in, partly because the economy has changed structurally, but at the same time, it's not something that's going to go away quickly.
Let me make a few comments in response to the questions that you asked. How deep a crisis? Well, the point is we don't really know. There's enormous uncertainty. It's a treacherous time and a lot of vulnerability at financial institutions and a lot of turbulence in financial markets. I play the role of optimist usually in a room like this and relative to Dick and Jan. We have a booming economy in the first half between 0 and 1%, no recession. That's in the absence of fiscal stimulus. But one of the things that we really believe is that the fiscal stimulus will turn out to be extremely well timed, will have a powerful and concentrated effect before it reverses out, will push forward growth into the second and third quarters at a time when the economy is very vulnerable. And by the time it reverses out, we will have seen some considerable diminished drag from housing and stabilization, if not some reversal in credit markets. So I think we have a chance of avoiding recession, but I can't say that I'm extraordinarily confident about that. Will there be a price from what the Fed has done in greater regulation? Well, greater in some respects, maybe less in other respects, but you can't have investment banks having access to the discount window without having bank-like supervision. I mean, that's the basic story. And we're about to have a long discussion about what the regulatory framework should be like. Should we have a unified financial services supervisor? Should we give more power to the Fed? And these are incredibly interesting issues because often in times like this, the banking regulation is shifted to a financial services supervisor, and the central bank loses its window on information in the financial system by being taken out of the role of bank supervisor. One last thing on the role of the federal government. The Fed's the only game in town now. Would like a little help. Got a little help from in terms of fiscal policy. Would like a little help in other aspects to restore some health to mortgage markets and housing. It puts the Fed in a very difficult position, being the only player. And it has to take credit risk on its portfolio because the Treasury and the Congress are unwilling to put taxpayer dollars at risk when I think this is a point when it needs to be done.
Okay, just a point of clarification. Richard, you used $1 trillion as the hit from the current situation. And David, you used a figure of $44 trillion for the unfunded liabilities. Just from my own naivete here, are those metrics comparable?
The short answer, Bill, is no. They're not comparable. The $44 trillion is clearly a present value number, and the $1 trillion is simply the erosion of the capital base. The problem with the $1 trillion of losses is that when you erode the capital base, you want to lever that into the lending capacity of those institutions, and whatever you think the right leverage ratio is. One way or another, either they replace that capital and or they cut back on lending for a multiple of that. So that can have a very significant depressing impact on economic activity.
Let's talk a little bit about the economic outlook. I think it's right that it's very uncertain, but I think, the outlook is always uncertain, but it's particularly uncertain now because we have essentially 3 negative cycles going on whose impact is extremely uncertain. The first is in the housing market, where you have housing prices going down, foreclosures going up, housing prices going down, foreclosures going up. And the second is in the financial markets, where you have loans going down, people having to sell assets, asset prices going down, losses going up, loans going down, etc. So we have 2 sort of separate cycles, one in housing, one in financial. And then, of course, we have the normal real and financial linkages as well, sort of on top of that. And it seems to me that the central question is how far those will go, to which we probably don't know the answer, and also what the role of policy might be in limiting the downside risks from those processes. So that would be my, and in terms of the sort of issues about greater regulation, well, you know, we ended up with a boom where a very large part of what happened was that the financial sector found various ways of leveraging its capital up, particularly the investment banks, but also the commercial banks. And, you know, it's not clear that that's the ideal that one wants to aspire to next time. So, I mean, you know, is more regulation coming? Well, yes. I mean, the question is whether it's good regulation or not. But I mean, it's not like the financial regulators did particularly well this time around.
Could I, Jim, Bill? Yeah. Could I, as you discuss these issues, let me just throw another thing on the table. There was a comment that the stimulus package hopefully will produce, you know, an injection that will help the economy or give it that boost, and certainly the president has commented on that as well. If this is a housing crisis, if this is a financial structure crisis, if this is a credit crunch, then what the hell is $150 billion that's going to kind of flow out to individuals who are going to probably spend it on gas and groceries? What is that going to do about the fundamental crisis?
Well, let me answer that for a question. Let's take a look at 2007. The economy grew 2.5%, but housing subtracted more than a percentage point. Outside of housing, the economy was growing at a 3.5% rate. Does that matter? Of course it matters. Okay, so $116 billion of rebates is a very sizable package. It will increase consumer spending. It will mean that employment and output and incomes will be larger than otherwise would be, and it gives the economy a cushion. Does it solve the housing problem? No, but imagine how much worse the housing problem would be if, in addition to the inventory of unsold homes, we had unemployment rates rising rapidly. Okay, you know, being able to forestall that or postpone that for a while until the economy has its own sort of natural recuperative powers is very, very important.
No, Bill Hoagland did. I'm actually going to be very brief just on this. I think one thing that isn't noted enough is that the impulse or the stimulus from the legislation is going to come in a very narrow period of time. So people often say 1% of GDP. Well, that's 1% of GDP for a year. It's delivered basically in a quarter. So there's a very concentrated impact during the latter half of this year. And then Dr. Meyer had already mentioned there is some adverse consequence for economic growth in early 2009 as that stimulus is removed. So the combination of a very concentrated delivery of fiscal stimulus during the latter half of this year and also the lagged effects of monetary policy, that's the other thing you need to remember. The interest rate reductions that have occurred, if you believe traditional transmission mechanisms, and we may not be in a traditional period, but according to the traditional rules of thumb, take 4 to 8 quarters to reach maximum impact. And so a lot of the things that were happening earlier this year and even late last year sort of build in momentum during the latter half of this year. So it is possible that economic activity is at its sort of weakest right now. And just to underscore the other comments that have been already made, there's a lot of uncertainty, but it is important to remember there's also a lot of stimulus that's sort of in the pipeline that may offset some of the other things that are going on.
Yes. I thought Dr. Hoagland's observation about the $4 trillion versus the $44 trillion is very important. Dick pointed out that they're not comparable, but they are related. That's the key. And the multiple of $1 trillion of losses at an acceptable kind of leverage is $20 trillion. So that means there's got to be $20 trillion of adjustment downward in credit availability over some time period, which is going to be a drag on the effectiveness of monetary policy. So obviously, this speaker has a view, and his company has a view, that this is a profoundly serious structural adjustment that we're going through that is related to a long-standing discussion about needed current account adjustment processes. And we'll add to that that in addition to the current account adjustment process, we have higher energy costs, commodity prices, and food prices, which are affecting the credit worthiness of all the financial architecture that was put in place to finance tens of thousands of business plans across the country based on $20 and $30 oil in a world of $100 oil. But that's not actually why I asked to be recognized. I want to go back to David Walker's comment, which is about the long term. This discussion we're having is extremely short term. It doesn't really matter whether we're in a recession or not. The reality is, if we were in a room, all of us together, and someone locked the doors and said, gentlemen and ladies, in 10 to 15 hours, all the oxygen in the room will be gone, we would probably sit around and talk about what we could do for a couple of hours. But then what we'd notice is that the air is getting a little heavy. And then about 4 or 5 hours, and this when we're halfway there and half the oxygen in the room is gone, life is going to be very unpleasant. So this, political scientist friends of mine tell me that the fact that smart people have been aware that the oxygen is going out of the room over the next 10 to 15 years accounts for much of the bitterness and rancor in the public discourse about the budget, because they're pushing and shoving and elbowing each other because they know what's coming. And the question is, kind of like in this room, are we, well, the reason I'm here, this is the first time I've been here, but I'm not interested in really being here to talk about recession or not. I'm interested in whether we're prepared to talk about kind of the seriousness of what's coming. I've read all of David Walker's speeches, and I see it slightly differently. It's the same answer, but a slightly different interpretation. We are going through a historic transformation in this country over the next 10 years. The budget is not about money. It's about relationships between people. It's between who gets what, who pays for what, how they get it, over what time period they get it. When the budget is terrifically out of balance, as the $44 trillion number suggests, relationships between Americans are tremendously out of balance. They're stretched to the extreme. In the past, when we've had these extremely stretched relationships between American citizens, they were resolved. They were always resolved. Some more painfully than others. There have been four, in my way of looking at it, or the group of people that I sort of hang around with, there are four previous major resolutions of imbalances between American citizens. The first was the American Revolution. That was about British citizenship and American citizenship. They wouldn't compromise. We pulled out, fought a war, we won, we started our own country. The second was the Civil War. That was about the imbalance between free and slave Americans. The third was the women's right to vote. The fourth was the American civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. And the next one we're going through is the resolution of imbalances between Americans that are reflected in our budget. Key in this is there a way of talking about this? And David has been trying for years to find that way to talk about it that galvanizes public understanding and action. I don't have a concrete answer, but a group of us are thinking that the principle that seems to be in general agreement by everyone is that if there is oxygen going out of the room, and if they brought in a bunch of young people, kids, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, what we find is very quickly we would be trying to find a way so the kids can get the oxygen and the rest of us in our geezerdom go on to the great beyond. So what I'm interested in focusing on, if we can, is a process in which we can get the public to understand that the oxygen is going out of this room, whether we're in a recession or not, is almost immaterial to the bigger question, which has been here before this economic discussion. The economic discussion we've got now, I believe, is closely related to why we're into the budget question. It's only going to make it worse. The oxygen is going to go out faster, and this community, I believe, has a responsibility to come up with a way of communicating to the public very quickly about what the circumstances are and lay out a path of resolving the imbalances between American citizens as honestly and as quickly as possible.
Thank you. We have a number of people who want to be recognized. We're going to go back to the beginning. Congressman Paul Ryan was scheduled to be one of our leadoff speakers. Because of unusual voting patterns in that August body, he's only been able to join us recently. Now I'd like to recognize Paul for a statement.
Thank you. I hate to interject in a conversation that you already have flowing in one direction or the other, so I'll do that though. So let me start with this. I'm looking at this document, Taking Back Our Fiscal Future by Brookings and the Heritage Foundation. Joe Antos, Bob Bixby, Stuart Butler, Paul Cullinan, Allison Frazier, Bill Galston, Ron Haskins, Julia Isaacs, Maya McGinnis, Will Marshall, Pietro Nivola, Rudy Penner, Bob Reischauer, Alice Rivlin, Isabel Sawhill, Gene Sturley. I don't know all of these people. I like all of these people. I like what they're doing. This is, thank you. You know, I know who you are, Bob. This is very helpful. This is very important. And we in Congress need to make sure that we don't make this such a partisan thing. We have different ideas on how to fix these things, but this kind of document, this kind of rhetoric helps us get to that platform, get to that stage where we're discussing our ideas on how to fix these things, not whether to fix these things. So let me thank Maya and all of those of you who are participating in this, because building a consensus that we need to act is where we are not even at that point yet. I'm grateful to what David Walker's been doing around the country, along with others on the Fiscal Wake Up Tour. I think I see David over there. And we can all agree that the looming entitlement crisis is the greatest threat to our nation's long-term economic and budgetary future. That goes without saying for those of us who care about these issues. And we can all agree that the longer we wait to begin reforming these programs, particularly Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the larger the problem becomes and the more difficult the fixes are. We all can agree on that. There's a need for discussion and there's a need for education. I believe that the greatest need for people like me in Congress is to get us to start acting, is to try and make it cool to talk about actually reforming these programs, to actually start proposing ideas so we're actually bantering back and forth at a good level of conversation how to fix these things. I personally look at it in the following way. 3 things we should keep our eye on the ball as we write these programs, as we write these reforms to fix this problem. First, we need to have a commitment to fulfill the missions of these programs. The missions of health and retirement security are important missions for this government. You know, I'm a conservative. I agree with the mission of this. So this is something that we all ought to be able to agree toward, most of us for that matter. Second, we need a program that will eliminate the future burden of debt for future generations. The weight of this burden is going to explode. It's going to sap our creativity. It's going to sap our prosperity. And it's going to, for the first time in the history of our country, sever the American legacy of leaving the next generation better off. And so we have to make sure that whatever it is we do and whatever proposals we come up with, it meets the mission and it pays off this unfunded liability that we've got. And third, and this drives and is related to the first two, we need to win globalization. We don't need to just survive globalization. We don't need to learn how to deal or handle it. We need to shape it and win globalization. That means we have to have real budget policies that accomplish this. Real reforms, top-to-bottom reforms that restructure these programs. We need to have a new tax code that allows us to do this. We need to have a government that is small enough, not too big enough, that compromises these missions. If you have all 3 of those goals in mind, it does necessarily require a lot of reforms and a lot of changes, and you have to keep an eye on how big you want our government to get. These are the things that drive me. I think we have an opportunity. You take a look at the next generation coming up, the generation I come from, the X generation, and we're used to choices. We have iPods, we go to Starbucks, we are on the internet. We require choices and quality in every aspect of our life. We expect that we're going to have competitive choices, we're going to have better quality at a lower price. So why on earth can we not get that from government? I mean, that defies the logic of this generation. And so I, for one, believes that we can do this. It's going to be tough, It requires people in Congress to lead with their chins in some of these cases, and that is one of the things that I intend to do. But number one, this choice generation is coming of age. And the notion that we can't have choice and competition in these entitlement programs just defies logic. It defies every other aspect of our lives that we already enjoy. And so we have a process and a political system that doesn't work. The process itself is broken, and the politics are broken. People like me need to be contributors to fixing that, not people who are exacerbating that. Unfortunately, most people in Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, have gone the other way. I had a Social Security bill that I liked. I'm sure some people here wouldn't have liked it. That was supposed to come to the floor a couple of years ago. My own leadership pulled it because you got to remember we have an election year around the corner. That's what I heard all the time. The problem with this is every other year is an election year. If you have an election year around the corner and that's what's stopping you from reforming these things, we will never do this. So we need to have some kind of a truce so we can get to the point of actually talking about these ideas. And I want to thank you for including me here today, and I'm sorry for being late. We just got finished with votes. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to revert to Mr. McKelvey, and then we'll recognize those people whose flags are flying.
I feel somewhat embarrassed making this comment after the last two, which were grand sweeping comments about budget direction, because my comments were really much more oriented towards thinking about what's been going on in the economy and what we might anticipate in the period immediately ahead. And the point I wanted to make really sort of built a little bit on what Peter Orszag said earlier about the concentration of stimulus in the second half of 2008 and the likely effects in 2009 that you came off of that, is to simply underscore a view that we have anyway, that whether this is a recession or a period of slow growth or however you want to call it, and we're clearly in a very sluggish period now, it's very likely that we're going to be in a period of underperformance of the economy for some length of time. We've seen this pattern in the last couple of cycles for reasons that Jan referred to earlier as being somewhat structural. But I think you can look at what's going on currently with respect to housing and with respect to the credit markets and add a couple of reasons why this is going to continue or aggravate this pattern in the next year or two, if not maybe even a little longer. First, on the credit markets, obviously we've got a very serious degree of stress in the credit markets, and a lot of people very reluctant to deal with one another, and that sort of thing tends to just sort of hang over the economy very much the way the thrift crisis hung over the economy in the early 1990s, and I think you can anticipate that that would be similar. And second, with respect to housing, a lot of the work we have done has suggested that despite how deep this cycle has been over the last couple of years, you're not likely to get the rebound in housing that typically has followed these kinds of sharp contractions in housing, because the imbalance is fundamentally different. I think it would take much too long to go through that, but the essence of it is that there is essentially a very large excess supply here. And so you're not going to have a lot of the normal stimulants to strong growth that you would typically have in the early stages of a business recovery. And I think the connection of that to the federal budget is that there will be an ongoing pressure over the next couple of years to continue stimulating the economy. And that is going to then start to intersect with the scheduled expiration of the tax cuts in 2010, end of 2010, early 2011. And I just simply wanted to lay that picture out in terms of how we think things are going, not necessarily in the next 6 months, but in the next several years.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Just a couple of brief remarks. Missing from the narrative of what's been going on, particularly with the Bear Stearns bailout, is a good description in the popular press of who is a Bear Stearns creditor and why is it so important that that creditor be paid in full. Because I don't think Main Street has any idea of that. I myself don't have a very good idea of it. I have a pretty good idea of who is not a Bear Stearns creditor. I'm on the board of one of our local banks, And the first time I heard the word subprime, I bumped into our CFO on the one street in our town. And I said, any? And he said, of course not. And so I think moves like this have distributional consequences that are not being brought out. Second point I'd like to make is that another interpretation of even the fiscal stimulus is that it's a financial bailout. A very large percentage, it may not quite be a majority, but it's a very large percentage of the people who will receive rebate checks either have credit card debt, which they would be wise to pay down, but there's no guarantee that they will, much like the other bailout, or they would have had to take on some credit card debt for food and groceries and gas coming up. So even there was something of a financial bailout. We moved some very large amount of billions of dollars off the credit card companies' balance sheet and onto the federal government's. And lastly, I'd like to say that whenever there's a bailout, there has to be some austerity imposed. And there clearly is no austerity imposed with that fiscal stimulus. Even a group like this, or the convening organization, decided that it would leave language about paying for this stimulus in the out years off of its requirements. And so that's what invites the next crisis, is that sort of activity.
And back to this side.
Good, my comments actually come right off of that because it's about fiscal stimulus. And Andrew Samwick on his blog actually did call us a little bit out when the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget said, we thought with the first round of stimulus, we had a couple criteria. We thought it was generally a good idea. If done properly, we didn't think Congress would be able to do it well. They did it quickly. I guess I didn't think through the fact that when being able to say you're there helping Americans and the economy is at play, suddenly you have bipartisan cooperation in a way you generally don't. And of course, I'm not at all certain that that was the right thing to be looking at. I'm less certain now when I hear about talk of the second fiscal stimulus before we've even seen what the first fiscal stimulus will do. So the question that I really have for the group, and I'm so glad we have diverse points of view here, both on where the economy is, financial markets, and budget issues, is when you think about fiscal stimulus, how do you evaluate what the best way to move forward is? Do we want kind of a automatic fiscal stimulus that really just responds to pushing money into the economy and not trying to bail out certain industries, as we're certainly going to see a lot of political pressure to do? Or do we want stimulus that is crafted towards the kind of financial challenges, economic challenges that we're facing? Or do we not want fiscal stimulus at all? Because perhaps we are just trying to avoid the inevitable that when you have huge imbalances in your economy, as we have in our budget as well, you have to work through the pain at some point, and maybe you should pull the Band-Aid off quickly. I'm not sure of the answer at all. I do wonder if we are looking at a situation where, say that the fiscal stimulus options are good things to be pursuing, did we tie our own hands in this because of our past fiscal policies? I feel like in the past years we've seen so many examples of, because of how we manage our budget on an annual basis, when crises come along, whether it's September 11th, whether it's Katrina, and now whether it's what you see in the economy, we continue to sort of be reminded that when you have a budget where you've taken out all your own flexibility, you aren't able to respond to the needs and opportunities as they come along. You sort of think that that would knock some sense into us and say we need to have budgets that are flexible and can respond to the different situations that we're faced with. Leon always says dealing with our fiscal policy challenges will take leadership or a crisis. Here we are in a crisis. It's not at all clear that we're learning from this crisis about how we need to get a hold of our budget. And I think that goes to Congressman Ryan's comments. The challenges, the long-term challenges that we face are well known, certainly to all of us. Nobody has wanted to confront them for a long time. I feel pretty certain in saying that the current situation in the economy and fiscal market and financial markets will move politicians, maybe some exceptions, another one sitting down there, people who are really looking forward to things we can do about it, but will move us in the wrong direction, where you start hearing we can't possibly be talking about things like reforming entitlements. We need to figure out what kind of bailout we need right now. So I'm very interested in the link between irresponsible fiscal policies and how they got us to where we are, and how we are right now may make it even harder to confront the challenges that are already so daunting. Also on that note, I'd like to make sure that Congressman Wolf, when you're ready, you jump in and tell us a little bit about what you've been working on.
No, just a couple comments. One, thank you, and you know, all of you probably know a lot more about this than I know about it. I'm speaking not only as a congressman, but as a grandfather of 12 grandkids and five kids. One, you have really done your job. Most people now believe this is a problem. I went out through my district last week, 2 high schools, Warren County High School, 50% of the kids going to college. Another private school in Warrenton, 100% going to college. I asked the question, how many of you believe that Social Security was sound? And I looked at Mr. Colby, who had the great bill in last year, was sound, and they would get it. And absolutely not one student. Warren County, rural, Warrenton, very wealthy, a lot of Lexuses in the parking lot. Not one person raised their hand. So you have done your job. The subprime, unfortunately, has probably accelerated that, but everyone understands. There's the Simon and Garfunkel song, you know, man here, the boxer, remember that? A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. I think people are now hearing the whole story. So I think the only 2 questions out there are when do you deal with this and how? When is if you had a serious health problem. I just had a physical. If the doctor told me that I had X or Y, I'd say, how soon can you get me in to kind of deal with this? Or if I had a bad tooth that was decaying, I would say, Dr. Cavell, can you get me in next week? Or I'll call your office to get in now to deal with this because I want to be okay. So I think when you deal with it is now. How? Well, with all due respect, and I know there are differences, the bill that Jim Cooper and I have, and Jim has really done a good job. If you have not seen his presentation to the Blue Dogs, you will laugh and cry at the same time, is really the answer. And this puts everything, and Mr. Walker helped us draft it, and it's modeled after, see Leon, it's modeled after the Iraq Study Group. We got 5 and 5 prominent people, had no axe to grind, could say what they honestly believed. They were not influenced by various things that came together. What we've done to add on to the Iraq Study Group is we have required there to be a vote, like the base closing commission. If you don't have that, then, you know, there was a base at Vin Hill in my district. Nobody wanted it closed. Once it got on the base closing commission, it was okay to vote to close it. We put everything, and Brookings helped us put this together. Heritage helped us put this together. The GAO people did. We put everything on the table. Everything means everything. Medicare, Medicaid, tax policy, Social Security, all spending programs. They take 1 year to go around the country to have a conversation with the American people. So the American people are almost the New Orleans levee board. We have a Category 5 off the coast. Mr. Walker said we had a tsunami. That's your language. So the American people would be the New Orleans levee board as to what do they do. And then they would respond the way that they've been doing on the Wake Up Tour. And then this group of 16, 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats would come together and have a package and send it to the Congress and require the Congress to vote up or down. For those who think this is too big, we've got to do it in slices. We've got to slice it here, slice it here. For those of you who remember, when Jack Murtha would bring a DOD bill up with $500 million, it would take 45 minutes on the floor. Over. One amendment on an earmark on something will take 4 hours. 4 hours. It will go on and on where people say, when is this going to end? So the mind goes to the smallest thing and dwells on it. So if you put a big package, and we are in, and I believe now all the stuff that you guys have said, I have bought all of your studies. I think you have all made it. You convinced me. 2 years ago, I was interested in human rights, religious freedom. This was not on my agenda. But now I believe everything all of you have said. So if what you have all said is true, and we see the sovereign wealth funds, we see China, which is purchasing portions of, we see the Saudis had 15 people on those airplanes, and if you look at the latest LA Times report, still funding radical Wahhabism and madrasas up in Pakistan. They're going to own our country. So you guys were right, you men and women were right, we got to deal with it now. Up or down vote. Difficult times require unusual things. And I think, lastly, there are the votes in Congress to pass this. Senator Conrad has done a good job. Senator Gregg has done a good job. There are the votes in the Senate. In the House, it would pass. Jim has gotten there. We have 34 Democrats. We have We have Alan Boyd, who was Jim Colby's sponsor on his. We have Tanner. We have every political viewpoint in the Congress in both parties. Up or down vote, it would pass. And I think it would be good for the country. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank. Dr. Bennett?
Well, thank you. We've spent a lot of time talking about the short-run crisis, but now Mr. Ryan and Mr. Wolf and Mr. Duggar brought us around to talking about this long-run problem that our committee is, in fact, much more concerned about, indeed frightened about, as we look forward. And I certainly agree with Mr. Wolf that the future is now. We got to start very quickly dealing with it. But I think one of the impediments to quick action is what I would call a change in the attitude on Wall Street. When I was in government in the Stone Ages, now more than 20 years ago, I had the feeling that Wall Street was crawling all over this town and very much focused on the big issues of tax policy, the big issues of deficits. Right now, they seem to be absent without leave, and I'm not the only one who believes this. I heard Pete Peterson make the point just the other day that he's never seen a time when Wall Street is less interested in public policy. So I would challenge our Wall Street representatives here to tell us what's going on. Why is this lack of interest? Is there a political fear of making bold proposals? Or is it because you think you can make as much money with markets going down as going up?
Thank you. Dr. Furman?
If you want to hear from Wall Street right now, you can.
Can I just interject? I'm from Treasury. Half of my colleagues are from Wall Street, so I'm in the minority, not the...
Okay. Just some points picking up on some of what we heard. I mean, by the way, in terms of Wall Street, for what it's worth, when it comes to the deficit, I think the problem is the short-run deficit isn't as large as it was in the early 1990s. So the immediate short-run economic problems associated with it just aren't as big as what they were in the early 1990s. And Wall Street's a little less focused on say the next 10 minutes or so or weekends.
Wait till next year.
Yeah. In terms of two other points, when you think of the fiscal stimulus this year, if you add up the total cost of all the legislation relative to the baseline passed in fiscal year 2008, it's $975 billion relative to the January 2001 baseline for tax cuts, IRAP, prescription drug benefit, et cetera. The fiscal stimulus is 1/6 of the total cost of what's happening this year, and it's the only portion of that total cost that's temporary. It's just happening in this 1 year rather than every year indefinitely unless something happens otherwise. So as we think about the distribution impact, which Andy brought up, which I think are quite important, think about the fiscal impact of that fiscal stimulus, it is relatively trivial compared to a lot of these other bigger issues and compared to most of the other legislation we've passed over the last 8 years. As we think about Andy's point about bailouts, I thought that was very important. I think a lot of this legislation, I think it's very hard to craft legislation that doesn't have unintended benefits for some groups. So you look at the Frank Dodd housing proposal. It basically goes to a servicer who has a $100,000 mortgage and says, you have a choice. You can keep this $100,000 mortgage, which you may not be paid back on, or you can have $80,000 in cash right now. By definition, giving that deal to a servicer is making them better off. They'd rather keep their current mortgage, they can. If the $80,000 in cash is worth more to them, they'll take that. So a proposal like that goes out of the way to try to not be a windfall, and yet by being voluntary at the end of the day, it can't be anything but a windfall to financial institutions. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. But what it does say, at least to me, is that we want to be a little bit more transparent about it. So I prefer, for instance, if you're going to use public money in housing, as much as possible to appropriate the money up front, say how much that total amount of money is, and be clear who it's going to so you can debate that rather than trying to pretend that we have, for instance, costless solutions or solutions that don't have any bailout elements to it. So it's that level of transparency, at least in housing policy, that I think is important.
Thank
famous basketball coach Jim Stimulus, we all knew we should have at least, that's also come up, is that when we talk about the financial market crisis, people had been writing for years and talking about for years, including a former colleague of mine, who many of you know, Ned Gramlich, about some of the regulations, not all of them. I know it's a tough issue what they are, but some of the regulations we needed to apply to those parts of the financial sector that were being excluded from those regulations. And we all know that not only did we have, but we still have a number of agency problems in Wall Street in the business sector, where it's a heads I win, tails you lose type of reward structure, and we know they're there, and we know that they need to be fixed, and we're still not addressing them. Where this brings me to the choices is, I think what we also know is that these choices are being presented in a way, the long-term choices are being presented as if they're long-term, but in point of fact, Rob talked about the oxygen being sucked out of the room. It's really being sucked out now. We're already feeling the squeeze, and those choices are squeezing children's programs. And if you're worried about it from the investment side, they're squeezing anything that you might call investment in the budget. I know it's hard to measure, and I'm not arguing necessarily you should have a capital budget, but no matter how you'd measure it, we're moving more and more to a consumption budget and away from an investment budget. If you care about mobility, if you're progressive, we're moving away from programs that in any way promote mobility among low and moderate income people, and that's all happening right now, and it's not in the future. And I think we've got to figure out ways both to get this process to be able to at least fix the things we know have to be fixed, where it doesn't seem to me it's a matter of compromise, it's literally a matter of dealing with them, and we have to make it clear in terms of the long-term budget issues that they're no longer long-term, they are here right now.
Thank you. Read the name of the next.
Bill Descan.
May I disagree with you, or those of you who described the tax legislation this winter as an economic stimulus package. For tax legislation to increase economic growth, it has to increase the incentives to work, to save, to invest, to increase productivity. This particular tax legislation takes $120 billion out of the capital market and gives it to consumers. And that is probably pro-cyclical, not counter-cyclical. In the typical recession, for example, consumption spending continues to go up. It's investment spending that falls off sharply. The last two recessions, for example, in 1991 and 2001, consumption spending continued to go up throughout the recession. And typically, in other recessions, consumption spending falls much less than investment spending. And what this package does, it basically redistributes where the demand is going to be, but without affecting total demand, it redistributes it from investors to consumers. Now that is a pro-cyclical, not a counter-cyclical measure. It will have no economic stimulus in the economy this year or next year. And in fact, it worsens in some dimensions the long-term economic prospect. At least in the short run, it increases the marginal tax rate at the phase-out range of the credits and deductions. It takes money out of capital investment, and puts it into consumption. My hope, contrary to the advocates of this foolish program, is that consumers take this money and they pay off their consumer credit, which costs them 16 to 20% a year interest on that debt. And that, in fact, is most of what happened into the 2001 tax bill, is that they paid off a lot of consumer credit. Now, there's been a good study now of 8 or 9 stimulus packages since the end of World War II. The study concludes that it has no aggregate demand effect, but that it probably has a counterproductive effect by increasing consumption relative to investment. So let's stop calling this a stimulus package, but to recognize that it is a redistribution package that probably hurts our longer-term economic growth.
Could I just respond to that, because I disagree so strongly with it? I think, Bill, you live in... Yeah, okay, Bill, you live in a world where we're always at full employment. If we're always at full employment and capacity and you increase consumption, then you drive it out of something else. If you're in a world where you're well below full employment and where you're getting further below full employment, you can increase demand relative to potential, increase incomes. This is not growth in the sense of growth of potential. This is growth in aggregate demand to push the economy back to capacity.
Bill, do you want a little server bottle?
Congress. Fairly frightening thought, actually, in many ways. So I don't see a good solution to this.
Can I try to put on the table something that as a topic for discussion and following up on Mr. Colby's comments, a question as to whether the basic framing and motivation of addressing our long-term fiscal problem, which frankly doesn't seem to be working that well so far, should be supplemented or complemented with another approach which does focus on the dramatic inefficiencies that appear to be the case within Medicare and Medicaid and our healthcare system overall. Is it more compelling to people to hear that Medicare beneficiaries in the last 6 months of life today cost $50,000 on average at UCA Medical and $26,000 at the Mayo Clinic, and we are all paying for that and we have no idea what we're getting in exchange for it, than to talk about the gradual path that we're on and our kids and our grandkids? I just want to raise as a question whether the basic framing that we have adopted in groups like this is likely to be effective just by sort of banging the drum harder, or whether an alternative approach is necessary.
Thank you. Leon?
Like many of you, I've gone through these discussions an awful lot over 30 years. And I think the problem is that we never really want to confront the main problem in the room. And the main problem is Medicare, whether it's Social Security, whether it's the economic crisis. You're dealing right now with a very dysfunctional government in which both the President and the Congress are in constant gridlock, and no one seems to want to negotiate with anybody on anything. And as I have said and continue to say, you know, we only govern by leadership or crisis, and this town now largely governs by crisis. If the crisis gets large enough, like the economic crisis, then you can develop some kind of consensus on a stimulus package. If something else blows up, like the housing market, you might be able to agree on some other kind of bailout on the housing market, largely because it's all borrow and spend. You don't have to worry about how the hell you pay for it. And so that makes it an easy way out. You know, in 1987, when the markets crashed, Ronald Reagan, to his credit, said to both the Republicans and Democrats, we have to sit down and come to an agreement as to how we reduce the deficit and how we deal with it, establish some kind of fiscal responsibility. Democrats and Republicans came together in probably the first package that dealt with that. George Bush, his father, to his credit, did the same thing in 1990. And we sat around a table and put everything on the table and came out with what I think was a pretty important agreement. Bill Clinton, to his credit, basically took on this challenge as well, unfortunately, on a partisan basis as opposed to a bipartisan basis. And then in '97, there was the balanced budget agreement. Why the hell can't that happen today? What is wrong? What's wrong with the political process? What's wrong with this town that a president, Republicans and Democrats can't sit down and deal with every one of these crises we've just described?
Thank you. Bob Reischauer.
No, it's a matter of accountability, and because there is no accountability, there's no will to act on these things, and they are painful. I wanted to make one comment about the discussion that we had about the short-run economic situation, but not derail us from where we're going now, which is, I think, in a much more important direction. And my comment would be that the discussion sounded like we were the masters of our own destiny. This is a discussion we could have had in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, and even through the 90s, but to a very considerable extent, we aren't anymore. We depend for paying for the fiscal, and I put in quotes for you, Bill, stimulus package, borrowing some more from the Chinese. There's somebody else involved in this game now, and the world is really very different. While we do have the largest and most liquid market in the world, since our last recession even, there's been substantial better opportunities for world investors in the Euro market area, in China and India, and in some other emerging markets. So our ability really to, in a sense, define solutions on our own, I think is gradually eroding away, and we have to consider that as we have these kinds of discussions. Jim Colby really made the other point I was going to make, which is we have this great terminology. It's a tsunami, it's a hurricane, it's a train wreck. We're headed for the cliff. But in fact, none of these things really reflect what's likely to go on. It's really like the sea level is rising gradually, or the rainfall is disappearing a few millimeters a year, and what we will do is try and combat the symptom rather than the disease. We'll build walls to keep the sea from
coming into New Orleans or wherever, or to protect southern Florida. And in the long run, it's futile. But we will waste a tremendous amount of resources. What Mr. Wolf pointed out is really how our educational system is succeeding. Kids now know the right answers to the questions, but the real issue here is whether they change their behavior. And while they all might say there's going to be no Social Security when I retire, they aren't saving anymore. They're still buying the iPod with their spare change. They're still going to Hawaii for spring break or whatever. And what you care about is not that they know the right answer, it's that they behave the way the incentive should make them behave. And I think we have a very difficult problem educating people, by which I mean not getting them to say the right answer to the question, but rather to do the right thing. And as long as we look at the current budget situation, you look and say, well, when we're through this rough patch, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you know, deficits are going to bop around well within the range of those experienced in recent history for another decade or decade and a half. And if the Chinese and others are willing to lend us money during that whole period, we'll just float along the way we're doing now, with no incentive on elected officials to do the right thing, because they're being judged on a 2-year framework. It isn't like we're going to go in 2025 when we wake up and say, you know, whoa, you know, how did we end up here? I'm going to take Colby's pension away from him. You know, there's some penalty for not acting when we should have acted. And so we really do have to do what you suggested, think of some way of changing the incentive structure.
Thank you, Bob. I'll try and answer Jim Colby's question, because that's what I consume myself with. I find it's a lot more fun going through life in Congress thinking that we can actually do this, because it'd be pretty depressing if I thought we couldn't. And we probably couldn't. No, just kidding. But I see out there, you know, I do a lot of town hall meetings. I'm doing 36, the Memorial Day recess. I just did 18 a month ago. I'm kind of a glutton for that stuff. But it's really good. And I represent a district that was Les Aspen's seat for 22 years. Wisconsin is manufacturing, it's agriculture. You know, Clinton won my district both times, double digits. Kerry won it, Bush won it this last time. Classic swing area. And my experience is people are hungry for big ideas. They're hungry, they're sick of the little, you know, tit for tat, the small idea, small ball stuff we're playing, both parties. They're ready for somebody to speak truth to these issues. And there are some big crises right on the horizon that are some artificial, some not, that I think we can take advantage of. The two ones are this: healthcare. In the Milwaukee metro area, and this is part of my stump speech, the Milwaukee metro area, if you want to have an MRI, it will cost you anywhere from $600 to $5,000. Same machine, same people, same building. The price of a bypass surgery in Milwaukee ranges from $47,000 to $120,000. I can go on and on and on with a list of actual prices. 300% disparity on prices. No transparency, no competition. You know, and I talk about the root cause of a lot of these problems is health inflation, healthcare costs. Not just the regional disparities that Peter's done a lot of good work on, but people know that that's broken. They know healthcare is broken. They know they need they need real fixes to this, because all of their paychecks just go to that. And so when you take a look at our entitlement problems, all of these issues are related, but chief among them is healthcare. And people are ready for big change. Now, obviously, I have an informed opinion on how to change healthcare, and it's not, you know, the single payer angle, it's the other angle. But people are ready for these big changes, number one. So they're willing to listen, and they're willing to vote for a bigger change. Number two is the tax tsunami that's coming. All of these expiring provisions at the end of the decade, along with the AMT, is an enormous tax tsunami that people know about. These give us, I think, an opportunity to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch, to look at a new code, a new way of doing healthcare policy, and while we do it, talking about fulfilling the mission of health and retirement security. So I do believe that the political winds are changing, that we have massive problems, whether it's artificial because of tax cuts expiring or just health care becoming unsustainable for the typical family, that this is going to give us an opportunity that we cannot squander, that we have to prepare for, and that within the next few years in this country, I, for one, believe we have a chance of actually turning the corner on these things. So that's the way I look at it, and I think it's a real possibility.
I would also like to just pick up on what Jim Colby said, because I think he very sharply kind of defined this, that we're really talking, as others have done, that this is really a political science problem. It's not, in a sense, a budget, in a sense we can look and say, we know how to solve the budget problem, but how do we get the political process to operate? And clearly that's what it is. And I think it's important to kind of pursue that a little bit, because as everybody said, we have an incentive system and we have a process that just isn't working, where people can see the problem. Members of Congress can see it almost universally, but they feel unable to act. And they feel unable to act in a sense because they cannot feel that they get what you might call public permission to act. Politically, they can't do that. So how do we change that? And I actually think, one could be rather more optimistic about that. And I think it also has some reflections on how we would think of, say, a commission as an example of trying to do that. I mean, Bob Reichert told us, of course, that it's very hard to get people to focus. Well, in some cases, it does seem we actually have been able to get people. Think about the global warming question. Temperatures are not going up 5 or 10%, every day right now. And yet, whether or not you think people are doing the right thing about this, they are focused on this. People are worried about their footprints and stuff like that. We're doing things. Now, why are we doing things in that area and not in this area? Well, I think that tells you some things. Engaging the public, really telling, disclosure. I mean, I think Al Gore has generally done damage to the world, but in this particular case, clearly what he did was to raise consciousness in a way that got people to talk about that. That's critically important. Now, how can we do that? I think we have learned some things. Ross Perot defied political logic when he ran because everybody said nobody would be interested. And somehow they were. How you present things becomes very important. Dave Walker, and I think I saw Bob Bixby, and myself and others have gone around the country in the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour, and Congressman Ryan essentially found exactly the same thing. When you tell people and show them up front, they react. They want things done. They do, in fact, engage. And so I think when we start thinking about what would be the elements of moving forward, that kind of public engagement and disclosure is very important. That's why changes in the annual budget process that would give full disclosure of the long-run situation is absolutely critical in terms of being up front. I think it's also why in Congressman Wolf's commission proposal, it's not the kind, I think, which Jim Colby kind of characterized, what I'll call the Andrews Air Force Base Commission, that sort of disappears and then on Monday morning comes back and says, this is the answer, put it through. It has a two-stage process, and stage one is actively going and doing exactly what Al Gore's doing or did, and what the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour is doing, engaging the public with information. It turns out when you do that, as we've all discovered, people are actually more open to things, open to lots of things, which the conventional wisdom is third rails, and you can't talk about them. You can talk about them. Public Agendas does the same thing in its process of getting constructive discussion, and so is Myra McGuinness. So, I mean, the fact is that you can do this, and so I think the idea of a two-stage commission, stage one being a very active engagement and conversation in order to set the parameters and, in a sense, get the broad public permission for then the details to be designed in stage two of a commission, recognizes this political process problem, this political science problem, in ways that we're clearly not solving right now. And I think the idea of just sort of getting a few people to figure it out and push it to Congress is clearly not going to work either. So I think we've got to think this through in those kinds of ways. And I'm very optimistic. I'm not very optimistic. I'm optimistic that it can be done if you sort of see it in that sequence.
Thank you, Stuart. Jim Jones?
Well, like Leon, I've been hearing this debate and conversation for over 30 years, and it changes a little bit, but not a whole lot. I think what has changed today is the body politic and the institution itself. in answer to Leon's question, why can't we build a consensus? We were talking earlier at the board meeting, one of the big reasons is the way congressional districts are drawn today. They're drawn in such a way that it's either Democrat or Republican, and in order to get elected, you appeal in your primary votes, or your primary elections, to the far left or the far right, and those are the ones who keep you in office. So when you get to Congress, there's less enthusiasm about moving to the middle and forming a consensus. The second thing that I think is different today is our sense of the future. I still do some speaking around the country, and I am absolutely amazed at the abject fear I see or hear among blue-collar and white-collar workers alike that there's no way this standard of living can be continued either for this generation or the next generation. And that's replayed back to the Congress and to the elected officials to blame someone else somewhere and dodge the issue. And so we have a situation, because of our fiscal policies, that the dollar is depressed, and it's very hard to unwind the dollar as the international medium of exchange. But if you have a continuation of this kind of fiscal policy, and if you send the signal to the Middle East, China, and elsewhere that have a lot of dollars they want to invest somewhere, that we don't want you to invest them in the United States, well, why should they continue to stay with the dollar? And that further depresses our outlook. So it seems to me that if you're going to tackle the situation, you're going to have to, A, look at how our elections are conducted, and then B, the public has to be engaged in a real discussion with real substance and recognize that we get out of this problem not by a stimulus package that is not paid for, but by actually doing some sacrifice in all parts of our economy and all parts of our society. So that, to me, is the biggest thing that makes me somewhat depressed about where we are today and where we're going to go in the near future. I don't think members or elected people, and I was one, move unless the people tell them to move. And I don't see that happening today or anybody stimulating that. I do have a question on the so-called stimulus package. If indeed the receivers of that pay down debt, or a large substantial amount pay down debt, does that have the same stimulus effect that they say will if they go out and spend it as a consumer?
Well, actually, I'd like somebody to answer that question, because I think I think the stimulus package was ill-conceived because, well, just because I'm one of those that thinks that we got to pay the price once in a while for our economic misbehavior. But would it be, someone said earlier, it would be better if they're going to get this rebate if they put it against credit card debt, or kind of trading credit card debt for government debt. But if that were the case, it probably would be better in economic terms. But what's the answer to his question?
Tim, did you have another point?
Well, that's the answer I was afraid we'd get. I do have a comment, which is.
But I don't know if Bill. I mean, I guess the question is whether you have an economic model.
So, depending on where it goes, what's the relative greater benefit?
The greater benefit to the individuals who receive these rebates and credits is to pay off the debt.
Here's where, yeah, which is not necessarily going to do anything about economic.
What's better or worse?
Yeah.
If you look at the impact on GDP.
I just wanted to make some comments, kind of picking up on 3 or 4 remarks that have been made recently. When you talk about bipartisanship to get big things done, I think one point is that there was there was a different caliber of leadership in the years in which we did Social Security reform, the '87 budget deal, the 1990 budget deal, which, you know, ran on hard times, but within a couple of weeks we turned around and did it again, and there was a bipartisan vote on both occasions. And in those instances, there was bipartisan willingness to put everything on the table. And that isn't the case today. Everybody now says, I'll only come to the table if you take this off the table. And then we never get to the table. And that's good political point scoring, but it doesn't get us anywhere near the kind of dialogue we need. I think the other issue is that maybe as we close in on this baby boom generation and all the exploding costs in both Social Security, Medicare, and also Medicaid that are attributable to that baby boom retirement, it's just tougher now. The choices are tougher. We could put together bipartisan budget deals 20 years ago without biting quite so deeply into the programs. We dodged them. We did. But even then, you could do tiny things there that would have, you know, sort of effects over time. Now we've got to do larger things there because we're closer to the real point of crisis. So I think that's a piece of why Congress continues to run away from this. And so now it seems we can only get bipartisan cooperation on things that bust the budget. Medicare Part D, the stimulus tax rebates. If we just put it on the credit card, we can get lots of bipartisan support. But we can't any longer seem to muster any kind of bipartisan leadership or bipartisan courage in the Congress to do anything that's truly difficult. I appreciate Orzag's point about health care because it is a larger and more immediate concern to the federal budget, and it's also attached to what's going on with health care in the private sector. But my concern about sort of having a debate about health care is that most people come to that debate with the same old attitude that they want their health care costs to go down. But they don't want to give anything up. They don't want to change anything. They just want it to be cheaper. Or they'll take more health care if someone else will pay for it. So I don't know that we can get any farther simply by making this a health care debate. And here again, when you get to what's driving the cost of health care, those are all very difficult things to talk about. You know, we know that the largest expenses in Medicare occur in the last several weeks of life. We don't want to discuss what we can do about that. We know that you pay twice as much for the same procedure in Texas that you would get in Iowa, but we don't want to talk about that. We know, as Congressman Ryan pointed out, that even within a geographic area, you can have widely varying cost features for the same health procedures, and Medicare will pay each of the facilities. Well, I shouldn't say that. But the private pay, but somehow this gets shifted, and that's my point. You can have this wildly disparate cost situation, which is in part driven by government policy, but we don't want to talk about how to fix that discrepancy. And it's because something has to give. In each of these cases, something has to give, and it's no longer a free lunch. And that gets us back to point one. How do you get bipartisan leadership that's willing to say, painful though this discussion is, we have to have this discussion, and we have to look at these tough choices because there are no longer any easy choices.
Very short message. Going back to how do you stimulate the public to force the elected officials to do something? When I was first elected to what the National Journal called the second most Republican district in the whole country, and I was a Democrat, somebody told me, he said, you know, if you'll activate the young people, they will hound their parents so much that the Republicans will vote for president, they'll vote for governor, they'll vote for senator, but they'll throw away a vote on Congress and elect you, which is what happened. I'm involved with another organization where we're going to try that same tactic, where we're going to have a conference of young people, young leaders across the country, using the internet and all these new methods of technology, of communication, to try to stimulate the young people to understand and be concerned about the kind of world they're inheriting, so that they'll start hounding their parents, and perhaps that will put some pressure on elected officials.
I just wanted to go back to the question that Maya McGuinness asked a little while ago about what sort of government interventions might be helpful in the current environment. None sort of broad policy support, from fiscal or monetary policy for the general economy, or something for specifically aimed at housing. I guess as far as the broad policy goes, I think. I'm certainly in the camp that would say that support from fiscal and monetary policy, can be helpful. Of course, there are ways to mess it up. There's certainly ill-timed stimulus and ill-timed restraint in sort of recent economic history. But I think if it's sensibly designed, it can help stabilize the economy. I do think that the fiscal stimulus package, will be helpful. It's a large amount of stimulus in a short period of time. There will be a payback effect, so it's not going to make a big difference to where we're going to be, say, a year and a half from now. But in the near term, I think it is stabilizing. And I think the reason why these sort of broad policies can be helpful is that we have a reasonable idea of where macroeconomic equilibrium is in some broad sense of what's the sustainable unemployment rate. At what point are you away from where you ultimately should be? There's still some debate about it. What's a sustainable level of economic activity? But you have a reasonable idea, and most of the time, I think you at least know in which direction you want to go. I think when it comes to housing policy specifically, it's much more difficult because the question there really is, what's the right level of house prices? What's the right level of the home ownership rate? What's the right level of sort of the depth of the financial system? These are much more difficult issues to have a firm view on. I think the worry is basically that if you're just, as far as house prices are concerned, for example, if what you're seeing is just a return from an unsustainable overshoot to a sustainable level, you intervene too early. You try to keep house prices at a level that's ultimately not sustainable. You just make the problem worse, and maybe you throw a large amount of money. Basically waste a large amount of money without ultimately having any impact. I think the justification would be for aiming, public funds at stabilizing the housing market. That at some point you're in an environment where you're overshooting. You're going. Further away from what the ultimately sustainable equilibrium is. I guess I worry that we're still on our way to a sustainable equilibrium as far as house prices go, and so what we could see is that we spend a large amount of money, ultimately don't see a lot of bang for our buck, and just sort of prolong the process.
Thank you, Mr. Bixby.
I did not pay for this microphone, so. I think that the thing to do is somehow find a way to make sacrifice cool. I haven't figured out in 15 years of the Concord Coalition, I haven't figured out how to do that, but it gets to a lot of what we're talking about. When we go on the fiscal wake-up tour, I think one of the hardest things to do is getting people to distinguish between short-term and long-term, because the focus does come back inevitably to the short-term. People want to talk about the war costs, they want to talk about tax cuts, and
you know, here we've just gone through 4 presentations of long-term charts, all basically saying the same thing, with fiscal policy going off a cliff or whatever. And I think we've always made our case very clear, and then somebody wants to know, yes, but if we hadn't enacted the Bush tax cuts, we wouldn't have this problem, or if we hadn't gone to war, we wouldn't have this problem. And so we have to go back and deal with the short term. And then the other thing is that, so I mean, the default mechanism in people's minds seems to go back to the short term, even though I think they comprehend what we're saying, that it's a real long-term problem. And I agree that people are willing to consider some very substantial ways to do something about it. But the other thing that comes from people and sometimes from the media is, if you can't explain to somebody why this is not important to me today, you won't get their attention, and nobody will do anything about it. And I've struggled with an answer for that one. The basic problem is you cannot tell them, honestly, that this is, you know, going to affect their life today. You might be able to do it in some abstract economic sense, but it doesn't have the immediate impact that people feel. And, you know, the basic problem is, if you're going to deal with these long-term fiscal problems that we all talk about, and they're becoming more of a short-term issue as we all age, you have to have a concern for the future. And if you have no concern for the future, this issue isn't going to resonate with you. You might have other problems. I mean, I think that if you have no concern for the future, that says something about people. But you know, if everybody's going to live in the short term, they're not going to address this issue. So that's why I get back to, and you're not going to make the political compromises that Leon asked, why don't people do anything anymore? I began to see, you know, you go back to, say, the slogan, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's a good mindset that I don't think people really have anymore. It's become more the political campaign rhetoric of, you know, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, that Ronald Reagan said and I don't mean to blame this on Ronald Reagan, I'm just talking about how things have changed from a sacrifice to the future to what affects you today and your personal life. And if we can't get off that, then I don't think we can get any action on these things. So again, it's somehow or another we got to make sacrifice cool again, just like it was in the 1850s or something. I don't know. The bridge. Yeah, that's the bridge. No, I personally, that's right. We need the bridge to the 19th century. So.
It's all short term.
Good advice. I'm going to go down this line. Most of us have had a chance to be heard once. We're moving on toward the cocktail hour. Some short interventions, beginning with you, Mr. Newcomb.
Just to maybe pick up on something Peter Orszag said, to get specific about policies, perhaps one of the silver linings in the housing crisis is to throw a spotlight on our housing policies, which we've moved ever more towards subsidization of housing. The article by David Leonhardt in the New York Times today, I think, underscores that, and it's my belief that the change in the 1997 tax law intensified the subsidies to the point where it encouraged, along with other factors, speculation in housing, or made it more possible and more financially attractive to do that. So if we can focus on specific issues and point out the flaws in some of our policies, maybe we can start to deal with those in a way that people see as tangible, and maybe reverse some of those policies. To put it in Rob Duggar's terms, if we have too much investment in housing and not enough investment in kids, then maybe that's something that threatens our long-term future as much as some of the problems that we're confronting here. And if we reverse that, then maybe we'll have some of the resources that we need to deal with our longer-term problems. I think one of the things that may have inspired leadership, not just by, as Leon pointed out, by the incumbents in the White House, but also by the Congress during the 1980s, was the fact that we did feel more constrained in economic possibilities. Productivity growth was not as good then, and in the 90s, the surge in productivity growth may have conveyed to us the notion that, you know, we weren't so constrained, and we lived through a period during which that extra dividend to growth made us feel like we didn't have to make the tough choices anymore. But we do need the leadership in both, in all ends of Washington. And, you know, the people who are here today, I think, exemplify that. Would that we could have more Paul Ryans in the Congress who would inspire their colleagues to make those tough choices. Rudy, you asked us a tough question. Why is Wall Street not interested in public policy? And I think the answer is there are lots of us on Wall Street who are very interested in public policy and have been for 35 years. We retain the interest. But as a group, I think people on Wall Street may be less interested because, to be cynical about it, you know, they saw those constraints back in the 80s when they were supportive of the policy changes that were being made then, and they saw that as being in their self-interest. And they haven't seen that for the past few years. Maybe one of the other silver linings in this crisis, I can assure you that right now there's probably more interest in public policy on Wall Street right now than I've seen in the past 25 years, both with respect to the regulatory environment.
Ask not for what?
Yeah, exactly. In many respects, there's interest in public policy on Wall Street, and I think that's going to intensify as we go forward. So people in this room should try to capitalize on that and not overlook it. Last, just a simple point in support of what Larry Meyer was saying earlier, but maybe putting it differently. You know, if the Fed's the only game in town, that puts an intense burden on monetary policy and runs the risk that we'll have out of these policies that are designed to provide a lot of liquidity to our financial markets and support to the economy that will ultimately risk higher inflation. So to have a more balanced set of policies that gets us back to where we want to be probably reduces some of that risk, and I think that would be a good thing.
I want to just go back to this. It is a constitutional question that Jim Colby pointed out. It is absolutely a constitutional question. It's a political science problem, without a doubt. And we're right. It is the 1850s. It's about 1858 in the sense that the oxygen is going out of the room. There are lots of problems. The deficits are getting larger. And actually, every day, people's lives are affected by this fiscal structure, as Gene Starley pointed out. And it was easier years ago, as Bob Reischauer pointed out, it was easier to make decisions that were tough because we had a current account surplus. We had our own savings pool, and the rest of the world was quite comfortable investing in us. Things have changed. It is like 1858, and the political problem then was what we have now, which is this enormously stretched relationship between different Americans. Abraham Lincoln was asked again and again in his campaign for the presidency, what's the highest priority? What's your presidency going to be all about? What principle are you going to use? Because you've got all these incredibly tough choices. What principle are you going to use to make decisions as you go through the next 4 years if you get to be elected? And Abraham Lincoln answered again and again, I'm going to preserve the Union. Smart people who heard that answer understood that when he said, I'm going to preserve the Union, he meant he was going to preserve the Constitution. And if he preserved the Constitution, he would preserve the Declaration of Independence, and the principle we're all created equal would become historic reality, one way or another, peacefully or through negotiation, but one way or the other, or war, it would happen. Now, Congressman Ryan, in all your town meetings, in the coming years, people will get up and ask you, all these tough choices you're talking about, what is your principle? What rule are you going to use to make that choice between A or B or C or D? What is the rule that you're going to use to make that choice? That's the question that we have to come up with, because we have to have an answer to that lots and lots of people agree with.
Yep. 5 years ago, I was sitting in a Blue Dog meeting exactly like this, talking about the exact same challenges. Leonard Boswell of Iowa was sitting next to me and pounded the table and said, "It's time for you to listen to me. It's not right that Texans get reimbursed twice as much, $6,100 at the time, per Medicare, Medicaid recipient. Iowa was getting $3,100. And he said, "That's not right." To which we said, yeah, it's not right. And we've since that time have tried to do a simple data mining project in which you look at the difference between Iowa and Texas and any other 3 states other than California, Louisiana, and Florida to see what might be the anomalies of difference, and use that as a basis to start a discussion on how we resolve the cost of health care. We still are not there. The bureaucracy always says we've already done that. Everyone else says we've already done that, but we have not done that in a way that would provide that answer.
Two very quick comments. Bridge to the 19th century. Jan's made a good point that maybe we are not below equilibrium yet, but business cycles used to be called panics in the 19th century, and there's a good reason for that, and we may be in one which looks a little more like a 19th century than a business cycle. Those things rarely just go into equilibrium. They normally undershoot somewhat. Second thing was bridge to the 22nd century. If you want to sell something in terms of a long run, talk about kids. I don't know how you get Social Security and Medicare when you talk about kids, but that's the solution.
Thanks. I have a few thoughts on long-term issues, and if anyone wants to talk about short-term, I'd be very interested over something strong after this. So we've been working on short-term issues for several months now, at least, really since the end of last summer. But before that, we were doing a lot of work on long-term, and Hank, of course, has a deep interest, as everyone knows, on entitlements. But his other deep interest, which obviously I didn't come in knowing, was on inequality and mobility. So we did a lot of work on that, on healthcare and other things, but really on education and training. And I didn't know this. It turns out the Department of Labor has a very nice training proposal. It hasn't gotten much attention, but they have it. And so we said, well, what else could we suggest? And what we came up with was that the focus on training is really focused on the wrong people, that we focus on the very hardest cases, you know, the sort of single parent and the displaced worker, the 50-year-old plus. Very, very hard. Training basically doesn't do much for them. And our suggestion, and I know some people are involved with campaigns, so feel free, was really to focus training on the easiest, the ones who are most likely to benefit from training. And all the studies say the training doesn't work, except for the people for whom it does work are the ones who already show very substantial labor market attachment. So this is the steady, reliable garage attendant, right? Low education, modest skills, pretty low income. How do you take a person and boost them up to the next level, right? They're not going to be a doctor, but maybe they can be an MRI attendant, go from 20 or 25,000 a year to 40 or 45,000 a year. And so we worked up, you know, a whole bunch of proposals and costed them out and things like that. And then, of course, you know, all this has gotten lost, the August and beyond that. But to me, that's sort of, if the entitlements are hard, maybe that's another thing that people could talk about in the long term is training and go there.
was no way. The government just was incapable of stopping that trajectory. And at that point, the of government debt to GDP was approaching 100%. I think it was upper 90s at that point. And since then, it's gone to 170%, 180%, sorry. And so we were right about the trajectory being sort of unstoppable at that point. However, Japan, as you all know, interest rates didn't go up. There was not a big effect on the financial markets of 180% of GDP in government debt. But we don't think that the United States has that flexibility and that it would not be able to support a level of debt such as you see in Japan now. And the reasons are what Bob Reischauer said, that we're dependent on foreign capital and therefore foreign investor confidence, and also we have a low savings rate, so the domestic market is unable to supply that level. So the point is that probably from our perspective, the rating of the US would go down sooner than that of Japan did if, again, Social Security and Medicare and all of this are not addressed one way or another. I'm not saying that it's going to happen now, but if you look at the CBO's projections, you know, sometime in the 2020s would certainly, if their projections. Yeah, well, I know. Our mainstream scenario on this is that, of course, something's going to be fixed somehow, and therefore it's not going to come to that. But if you just took the CBO's projections and said this is what's going to happen, then you would have problems.
Gene, can you be brief? You got a sign?
Bill can be brief.
I want to leave you with a sense of optimism. Who turned my mic off? There we go. I want to leave you with a sense of optimism that our political system has made major choices for a long period of time that have survived. The relative size of the federal government in terms of both spending and taxes has been roughly constant, as a constant share of GDP now since 1952, sort of plus or minus 1 to 2%. Within that period of time, we've made a massive reallocation of money from defense to transfer payments, for better or for worse. There's been these very big changes within the context of the total. We've had an almost complete elimination of the older forms of economic regulation. Price and entry controls, tariffs have gone way down. Antitrust is much less burdensome than it used to be. So the tax reform of 81 and 86 has by and large survived. It's been minor changes have been made since that, but it has substantially changed the tax system. We inherited, as a Reagan official, we inherited a top marginal tax rate of 70%. I see no prospect that it will ever go anywhere near that again, for example. We had a major welfare reform with a divided government in 1996 with a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. That has performed rather better than anybody anticipated, something like 60% of the reduction of the number of welfare recipients. I don't see the next Democratic government, which will be in a few months, reversing that situation. So we have made very big choices, not necessarily all at once. You know, the stability of the federal government share of GDP has been a succession of choices, but it has proved to be stable. The tax system has been twittered with a little bit one way or the other since 1981 or 1986, but not much. And the massive reduction of the older forms of economic regulation, I think, is with us. It's something that we have learned to live with, and by and large has been beneficial. So don't be discouraged. These problems can be addressed. They have been addressed in the past. They have been addressed without necessarily a unified government. A divided government is often a better way to address these matters, and often a better way for these issues to survive over a period of time. What it takes is a shared commitment over a number of issues to make these big changes
possible and to last. I was relatively optimistic that in 1998 we would get President Clinton to initiate a Social Security reform, and it came close to that. And it was destroyed primarily by the impeachment hearings. And so these issues can be brought up. I think there's potential bipartisan support for most of these big issues. And so don't get discouraged. We're going to be around for a good bit of time, and let's still work at it.
I will take the last word, and I will be brief because I came here, I'm an optimist, but I've been listening to this conversation today and realizing that the very body that we've been talking about is incapable maybe of solving some of these problems. We're now going to nominate for the first time in history 2 United States senators to become our president. So we've got that against us. So I think we have no choice but, you know, in a course of human events here, to become a Continental Congress with Ryan playing the role of Jefferson, to write the plan, to bring back to us for affirmation at some later date, so that we've actually got something we're all for. And if we're all for it, how can anybody be against it?
Amen.
That's how we do it.
Maya has a word before we adjourn for the reception.
Yeah, my brilliant summary remarks are going to be brought down to cocktails are in the next room. We are joined by a great group of people coming to the reception. At dinner tonight, we will be hearing about presidential candidates, fiscal policy, how those two things work together. So I still remain ever hopeful that with this many people, smart people in one room sort of thinking about how to get politicians to act, sooner or later, there should be some leaders who are actually just willing to say, this is what I would do, this is how I'd fix the problem. We hear an awful lot on how they would fix the economy, but we really need to focus on the longer term. We're going to talk more about that at dinner. If you are not staying, please let my staff out in front know that you're not staying at dinner because we're overpacked. Thank you for coming to this. Get your well-earned cocktail.